They say actually ended in the end of October, right around the 1st of November, but that went on, from the middle of the summer, June of 1940 through October. And I think we'll certainly learn a lot more about the Battle of Britain today. As I mentioned, called Black Week, or that's been the moniker it's always been called. That was really kind of the game changer in regards to the theory and the success of daylight strategic bombing with these appalling losses. 8th Air Force Bomber Command, and of course back in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon, and then there also was growing pressure from the RAF Bomber Command of what are you guys thinking bombing during the day? The British tried it early in the war in 1940-41 and absolutely were slaughtered, really in doubt. And after October 14th of 43, the assessors really looked at the concept of it, and eventually, as maybe an old sports moniker, sometimes you don't change the player, you change the manager. And Ira Aker, who I think, in my opinion, was very underrated in regards to a commander. Command was given over to Jimmy Doolittle, and tactics were changed. A lot of the architects in regards to formating, successful, protection for the bombers. May coming up with a combat box in regards to a high, middle, and low squadron, and how they could cluster together to be a very, very formidable defense in terms of a protection against the attacking German Luftwaffe fighters. The Spitfire came on into its own later in the war, where the Hurricane was kind of old news. The Spitfire was more improved.
Bentley Priory. We'll go inside and find out about the Battle of Britain.
It was vaulted over in the sort of mid-18th century when it was possibly used as a hotel, but no one really knows. And no one from the RAF or the maintenance teams or anyone actually knew it was there. Even when they repaired and changed the lighting system, they still didn't see the ceiling because it was vaulted over.
They were therefore between a rock and a hard, and it was made worse by the fact that when they got to the Channel, I am sure their generals went, they hadn't planned to get there. They didn't think France would fall, not to mention so easily. And I'm pretty sure our generals looked back across the Channel and went, oops, we didn't expect to fight the Germans there.
Lift thine eyes to watch a long-drawn battle in the skies, while aged peasants, too amazed at the words, stare at the flying fleets of wondrous birds. England, so long the mistress of the sea, where wind and waves confess her sovereignty, her ancient triumphs yet on high shall bear the reign, the sovereign of the conquered air.
You are in charge of air defence. That job actually existed some time ago. And the question I put to you is, how many aircraft are there up there?
Right now, 0.
None.
He had bought an early cathode ray tube, a primitive TV set from the USA. And he was bouncing radio signals off clouds. And he wasn't mad. His logic was, depending on the type of bounce back, I can tell the density of the cloud, its type and its height, and maybe help predict the weather. And somebody said to him, okay, could you do it for something a bit more solid? And he said, oh yeah. And that in the UK was the beginning of the concept of what they called radio direction finding. And it wasn't until the early 30s that the concept.
And the reason we went to the expense of totally reproducing many of the areas that were destroyed is because our Queen Mother used to come here quite a lot during the war, and it was very affectionate and close to her heart, and she had many dinners and balls here. To be able to get the quality of carvings and quality workmanship, some of the carpenters had to come out of retirement. There is one, and Britain is quite famous for lace. Right the way throughout the empire, used to supply the whole. And lace factories, large volume areas, lots of people, lots of workforce with skills were put to producing a lot of items towards our war. Mainly parachutes and various other items like that were produced by the lace manufacturers. And the girls themselves are really involved in lace manufacturing. We get a little bit worried because we were turning ourselves over to war production around 1937, 1938, and that's 3 or 4 years now of time coming up to 1940, that we're going to lose their skills, Britain. And the fight we had for our freedom, which of course was the world freedom at the time when we look at it. Along the top there is motifs and emblems from the various parts of South Africa and other.
And one man, on the verge of retirement, became its first commander-in-chief. Oversee the transformation of this force into the front line of our defense against the Nazi onslaught. Germany's rapidly developing Luftwaffe wasn't his only adversary. He faced many more. Dowding also saw things from a pilot's perspective and cared passionately for his fighter countries, and into France in May 1940, Dowding's precious fighter squadrons were deployed across the Channel.
The government has opened in desperate attempts to remedy the situation in France. Defeat in France will involve the final, complete, and irredeemable defeat of this country.
Fortunately, Dowding's clear-headed argument won the day. The inevitable, for which Dowding had planned for over 3 years, was fast approaching, before the German assault intensified.
July
Then, in August,
1940.
Hitler launched his all-out attack aimed at destroying Britain's airfield, which would leave our skies defenseless. Success for the RAF. This was the day when the Luftwaffe's morale was broken. Churchill later wrote, "The odds were great, our margins small, the stakes infinite." But the bliss continued. Exhausted and already past retirement age, Dowding reluctantly stepped down. This freedom that we now take for granted has its roots here in this building and in this very room. Although it would take another 4.5 years to finally secure victory, thanks to Dowding and his courageous aircrew, the men and women of Fighter Command, and all the support services, Britain's darkest hour also became its finest hour.
Do come closer, please. A story. A bit of light relief. I was giving a tour at the RAF Museum. From the seaside, these big masts, at the bottom there'll be a little hut with typically a lady listening and looking at a screen this big. Rotten TV program, because there weren't any anymore. If they have a plot, they put this thing down with an ID for that particular plot, its height, and an estimate of the number of planes. And they'll put that, and this on this map here, where the radar operator thinks it might be. How many plots there are on the table? They're constantly updating them. People in the sea, people shot down. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now there is conversation between the operators, all women down here, they're called WAFs, Women's Auxiliary Air Force. This is later, in 1944. I'm not sure what month. There's a suggestion it was during D-Day. So,
Beautiful room here with all sorts of memorabilia. And look at the dome.